Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Ahmad Alyaseer's short film, Our Males and Females, which is a Jordanian film that explores some issues of gender acceptance, the challenges that come with being trans in so that's not exactly correct. And this is one of the things that I think is interesting and problematic about the film. I think it's basically a good film. I don't want to sort of suggest that it's not, but there is a problematic element to it that I do want to talk about. So it doesn't actually explore the question of what it means to be trans in a religiously and socially conservative country. I assume that the film is set in Jordan. It's not specific necessarily to Jordan. I mean, the characters speak Arabic, which I believe is the main language of Jordanians. The architecture, the aesthetics are very clearly Middle Eastern, but I could see it being a number of Middle Eastern countries, and I would not have sort of said, that seems out of place to me as someone who has never been to the Middle East, and I've never been to Jordan, so I'm assuming that this is like or as what one would expect to see in a country like Jordan. But the Middle East, Islamic cultures throughout much of the world have very strong views about homosexuality, being transgender, etc., etc. And I don't want to give the impression that this is like an anti-Islamic commentary, because I'm from the United States, where our entire right wing is basically built on hysteria about trans people, which is completely unjustified. They're absolutely dumb fucking morons who are bigoted transphobes and homophobes, and they should shut the fuck up and re-examine themselves and their minds. But coming from the United States, I can very much sort of identify the same kinds of social problems that Alyaseer is working through in this film. So the film itself is actually about parents of a young trans woman. The father and the mother, played by Kamel Al-Basha and Safika Al-Tal. The father is Al-Basha, the mother is Al-Tal. None of the characters have names. They are just the father and the mother. But their child has come back from somewhere in the West. Their child has died. We don't know what the child has died of. She seems relatively young. Tatiana Beras plays the daughter. And when I say plays the daughter, I mean the daughter is dead the entire short film. It's only like 11 minutes long. So their daughter has died. I'm going to use her implicitly preferred gender, at least. Her daughter has died. And in Islamic culture, washing and shrouding a dead body is an incredibly important part of the death ritual. It's something that needs to be done within a relatively short period of time. Like, I don't know what the exact Islamic laws are, and I think different sects of Islam have slightly different guidelines, but broad brushstrokes, washing and shrouding a dead body in preparation for burial is incredibly important. But male cadavers are washed and shrouded by men, female cadavers are washed and shrouded by women. So this family has a problem. The father and the mother have a problem. The father, in principle, should wash his son. The mother, in principle, should wash her daughter. The problem is that their child is trans, so born as a son, but lived at least the latter portion of her life as a woman. And this is not necessarily something that anyone in this town seems prepared to conceptualize. The father attempts to wash their child, but feels that he can't because she's had breast implants. Throughout much of the film, they both refer to their child as their son and using male pronouns, though the mother does say this death prayer. Initially, she says it for her son. She subsequently says it using female pronouns. So the mother seems much more willing to conceptualize and sort of see from their child's perspective what that identity means and why that might be significant. They tried to bring in other washers because it doesn't have to be a person's relatives, although I think that's fairly common. The male washer they tried to bring in initially for their son sees the feminine features, the long hair, breasts, and was like, nope, I'm out. I'm a bounce. The female washer goes in. She starts washing the body, but then feels the penis, and no, she's out too. So they're torn between a cultural imperative that on the one hand, or a religious imperative, that on the one hand says you must wash and shroud this body for burial, and on the other hand, this cultural imperative that assumes binary sex and gender, that assumes that men will be washed by men and women will be washed by women. And there isn't a clear and straightforward way of navigating the difference that it might make when someone is trans. So ultimately, the solution, seemingly arrived at only by the father without consultation with the mother, is because he's a doctor. So he performs surgery on the corpse of their child, removing the breast implants and sewing up the incisions, basically returning their child to being their son, regardless of the will of their child. The fact that this child so identified with being female that she left her own culture, seemingly to go to the West, which is presumably where she transitioned. It's not ideal, right? And I say that as sort of an understatement, right? That in death, in the final earthly component of this human being's existence, her family has gone so far into denying her identity, the identity that she pursued and that was so central to her that she felt she needed to leave her country. The fact that that is denied to her in death is extremely problematic. At the same time, and I when I say at the same time, I don't want you to immediately think, oh, he's about to justify this, because I'm not. And actually, that's before I get to the at the same time bit. The other problematic element of this is that the daughter's experience as a trans person in, again, presumably Jordan, is not addressed at all. The only thing that we have of this daughter's experience is the treatment of her dead body and the rejection of her by to a degree, by her family, but by these other members of the community. So there's no explanation in the film. Again, it's an 11-minute film. You can't sort of fault it for this because this isn't its project, but there is no explanation in the film of what it means to be trans in a country like Jordan or in Middle Eastern culture, Islamic culture, etc., etc. That experience is simply absent. What we do get is the experience of the father and the mother. This is the primary conflict of the film. And that is still revelatory and still interesting in terms of what it means to be trans in this particular culture. In part because their struggles reflect the difficult position that their child would have experienced, but it reflects it secondhand, and it reflects it with the additional added lens of this is their experience, not their child's. So again, the sort of problematic element of the film is how it erases the experience of the actual trans person, and then at the end, the father erases his child's actual transness. Like he physically removes the signs and quite invasively removes the sort of external signs of her transness. And I guess it's also worth sort of thinking about this. Like, I don't know what the Islamic perspective or realistically perspectives, since I'm sure there are many conflicting perspectives. Islam is a wide and multi-splendored thing. But I don't know what the sort of Cartesian position is within Islamic thought on sort of the distinction between the physical body and the soul or the spirit or whatever it is. If their daughter has a female soul, and I don't like the term soul because it is some metaphysical nonsense that may or may not actually have any bearing on reality, but I think you get what I mean, right? If their daughter's sort of essence of her as a person was female, then the sort of mutilation against her will of her body to force it to conform to male social norms is quite a violent way of treating this person. They're the child of this family, right? So, I mean, I do actually have a lot of sympathy for media that depicts the struggles of parents trying to come to terms with their child's identity, an identity that often they don't understand. In this case, that no one in their community seems to have a framework for understanding. And so Alyaseer's movie is primarily about that. And I think that's an interesting and important topic to explore. At the same time, the erasure of the trans person themselves, of this daughter, is problematic in the film in terms of what it says about. And I don't know that Alyaseer, I may be sort of, I may be overestimating Alyaseer's sort of sympathy for trans people. I don't know. I hope that I'm not. But that erasure I guess in a way that erasure can be read as a form of sympathy, in that trans people are often erased within very conservative religious cultures. And so, to the extent that we are supposed to be critical of the father as opposed to sympathize with the father in these final moments of the film, yeah, I think it's a tough one to read because you can read it in these different ways. But that's also part of what makes it such a good short film is, are we supposed to sympathize, and to what extent, how far can our sympathy go? Can we justify what this father does when what the father does is based in his need, and to a lesser extent, the mother's need, rather than the need of their daughter?